Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Adventures in High-Value Pen Testing, A Taste of SANS Security 560 by Ed Skoudis. My name is Trevor, and I will be moderating this webcast. Today's featured speaker is Ed Skoudis, SANS Pen Test Curriculum Lead. Before I turn things over to him, the Q&A portion will take place at the end of the webcast, so please feel free to submit your questions at any point by using the questions window. Right now, I'd like to turn things over to Ed.
Thank you, Trevor. I really do appreciate it, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this webcast. This webcast is one in a series of webcasts that SANS does that are often referred to as a taste of something or other, usually a SANS class, where we give you a sample of SANS course material so that you can integrate that kind of stuff into your own job. Today we're going to be focusing on a taste of SANS Security 560, which is a course focused on network pen testing. And my goal over the next hour or so is to give you some ideas that you'll be able to incorporate into your next pen test. This webcast is sponsored by SANS Pen Test Austin. This is an event that we do at SANS. We're going to do it annually. It's the first time we've ever done it, and we're really excited about it. It's going to be really significant. If you do anything that's associated with penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, whether you run those things yourselves or have to deal with the aftermath, from May 18th to May 23rd, mark your calendar. It's an important thing. We're going to do some cool stuff there. It'll be in Austin, Texas, and we're going to have 6 offensively focused classes. We're going to have the SANS Security 560 class. I'm going to be teaching that there. We're going to have 504. The 401 class on cyber defense is going to be there. We have a whole bunch of really cool classes. The other thing is we're going to be doing some special stuff in each evening. So we've got 6 fantastic classes for you to take. One of the evenings, well, actually 3 of the evenings will be devoted to net wars. So we're saying net wars, net wars, net wars. This is SANS challenge environment. It's a SANS cyber range, really, and you'll be able to participate in it in 3 nights. Normally for a medium-sized or large-sized SANS event, we only do net wars for 2 nights. We do it here for 3 nights. Oh, and then one other night, there's a 4th night, we're going to be doing Cyber City. You see, we built a fully functional model city. It's an actual physical city, 6 feet by 8 feet, but it's got real industrial control systems in it that control everything, including things like the power grid, traffic lights, and so forth. And you're going to be hacking into the city as well as defending the city on one evening during this Pen Test Austin event. We're also doing something called Coinapalooza. Check that out. For each SANS course in pen testing, we have a challenge coin that you can win. So there's like a 504 coin, a 560 coin, there's a 542 coin, all these different coins for different SANS pen test courses. If you come to this Pen Test Austin event and you participate in net wars over those 3 evenings, you have your chance to earn a whole bunch of SANS pen test coins. You can earn up to 5 SANS pen test coins, each coin a different one for a different class. We call it Coinapalooza. That's pretty cool. We're also going to have barbecue. That's just the nature of Austin, Texas, right? And we're going to do a lock-picking evening as well. So that's kind of a new and fun thing for SANS to do. I love picking locks. So we're throwing everything we can into this. You got 6 great classes. You got 3 nights of net wars. You got a night of Cyber City. You got coins coming out of your ears in Coinapalooza. I'll be sitting there at a booth passing out those coins as you guys earn them based on your net wars performance. We got barbecue. It's going to be cool. You might want to check it out in more detail. It's at sans.org/pentest2015. sans.org/pentest2015. I hope you can make it. It's going to be a really cool event. Let's go to the next slide. So the topic for this webcast is a taste of SANS SEC560, Adventures in High-Value Penetration Testing. And the materials I'm going to go over with you are directly from the SANS Security 560 course. Some of you may have taken the course in the past. That's cool. You'll get to see some of the stuff that we've incorporated in recently. Some of you have never taken the course. Great. I'm going to give you some ideas that you can apply in your own jobs directly from the course itself. But let me introduce myself. Trevor did a short introduction a couple minutes ago, but let me just go over this in some more detail. I wanted to have something kind of fun and quirky to introduce myself. So imagine that I could issue my own SSL certificates. Well, I suppose anybody can, right? The issue is whether the browser will trust it. Well, you'll see here at https://ed.skoudis. Yeah, it'd be nice to have your own top-level domain as well. You'll see that it's a HTTPS connection, and if you go to the details of the certificate, it shows you what I'm all about. I'm a penetration tester. I'm an incident handler. If you if you look at my career, it's focused very much on red teaming, penetration testing, and using offense to help try to improve the defenses of our environment. I mean, that's what penetration testing should really be focused on. It's what I've really tried to zoom my career into. I'm also a SANS instructor and course author. I'm the pen test curriculum lead for SANS. I'm also the director of the Net Wars and Cyber City projects. It's really an honor to be able to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time. Let's talk about the context of the SANS Security 560 course. You see, the SANS Security 560 course fits into the pen test curriculum like I show you here. We have the 504 course. Maybe some of you have already taken that course. That's cool. It covers hacking attacks and incident handling. So it's a mixture of offense and defense. But then when you move into the pure play offensive courses, you'll see SANS 560 is one of the first ones here. It's important to point out 504 is not a prerequisite for 560. You could start with 560, then go to 504, or vice versa. Either way is fine. But 560 is one of the flagship pen testing courses for SANS because it covers the technologies, the tools, the mindset, and the methodology for doing effective pen tests. That's what 560 is all about, and that's what this webcast is all about. Now, if you really get into this stuff, you can then go from 560 into 660, which is advanced pen testing. And you can even go into deeper stuff like 760, which is advanced exploit development. It is insane. It's really an incredible class. It gets into things like writing exploits to defeat address space layout randomization. It gets into things like Windows kernel memory and manipulating that, the Linux heap, and a lot more. If you're more on the web app bent, we have 542 and 642, two great classes for web app pen testing. If you've got the foundations of penetration testing under your belt, like maybe you've taken 504 or 560 or 542, and you want to get some more hands-on stuff, we have the 561 and 562 classes. These are 80% hands-on, these 561 and 562 classes. The idea there is you understand the methodology. You already got that down. You understand the tools, but you want to take your career to the next level with a whole bunch more hands-on. If you're more interested in learning how to tweak your tools and write new tools, we've got Python for pen testers. That's the 573 course. And if you're more into the mobile device and wireless side of things, we've got SEC565 for mobile device security and pen testing, and 617 for wireless security and pen testing. So we've got a whole bunch of these different courses out there. If you have an idea for an additional SANS course, let me know, because part of my job as curriculum lead is to make sure we have courses that are useful to you in your career. So please do inform me. We also have some resources that you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here. But our focus here is going to be on the SANS 560 course. Now, 560 is a 6-day course, and it consists of these parts. Section 1 is on comprehensive planning, scoping, rules of engagement, and doing in-depth reconnaissance. 560.2 gets into in-depth scanning. So we go over all these different scanning options, scanning capabilities, so you can enumerate your attack surface. That's what 560.2 is all about. It's figuring out what the attack surface is so that you can then exploit it and pivot through it. 560.3 is about exploitation and what to do once you've successfully exploited it. And then once you get in there, you can start doing things like password attacks and merciless pivoting. That's what day 4 is all about. Now, to be a really good network pen tester, I think you really should have some pretty good skills on both the wireless and web app side of things. And that's reflected in the 560 course. Because sometimes, as a network pen tester, you're called upon to evaluate the security of the wireless infrastructure. Or oftentimes, as a network pen tester, you get called upon to look at web apps. And you need to be conversant in the most powerful tools and capabilities in those particular arenas. You see, from a philosophical perspective, I do think that some pen testers have over-siloed themselves. There are some pen testers out there who say, look, I'm a really good network pen tester. That's what I focus on. Or others say, I'm focused on wireless. Or some others say, my deal is web apps. That's where I focus. And those are all well and good. You might want to choose an area to focus. But if you are only focused on just those topics, I think you're going to miss the big picture and not be as valuable. So the whole goal of the SANS Security 560 course is to get you ready to do a high-value penetration test through scanning, through rules of engagement, through exploitation, through merciless pivoting, and yes, indeed, doing wireless and web apps. The whole course finishes with a capstone, which is a full-day pen test. You work in teams of up to 5 people. You work your way through a capture the flag contest. The winning team each person of the winning team gets that coin. Remember I mentioned those coins earlier for Coinapalooza? Well, if you take the class and you come in the winning team, you get that coin, and each of those coins has a cipher on it. So if I can go back a slide, you see we have these different coins here on the screen. You can see I'm pointing to my screen with my finger. Obviously you can't see that, but I point here with my pointer. Each one of these is a coin, and the coin has on it a cipher. So the 560 coin, if you flip over to the back, there's a cipher on it that you get to crack. 542 has a cipher on it. 504 has a cipher on it. Now, some of these ciphers are ancient. They're from thousands of years ago. Others are old, maybe antique. They're from hundreds of years ago. Some of them are from about, I don't know, say 70 years or maybe 75 years or so ago. And some other ones are ones that we created just for these specific coins. So you win the different coins by coming to Coinapalooza or winning the capstone of your class, and then you can crack those ciphers. All right, so let's talk about the SANS Security 560 course and then start giving you some specific ways to think about your job as a pen tester and ways to do that job more effectively. So the focus, the relentless focus of the SANS Security 560 course is to help you master the skills you need to be able to do an effective network pen test. It's organized around the workflow of pen testers, and that's what the whole thing is about. There's actually over 35 labs in the class because we want to make it really hands-on. And if you average it all out and look at the amount of hands-on material in the class, it's about 45% hands-on. 45% hands-on. So there's lots of labs for you to do. Like I said, it's over 35 of them. And it culminates in that full day pen test on day 6. So by the time you get out of the course, you've covered all these different labs and all the concepts under those labs, done them all hands-on, and you've done a pen test as part of your team of 5 on day 6. Additionally, the course includes tips for avoiding common pitfalls in pen testing. So we frequently say, well, you could do it this way, and there's a chance that it could crash the target machine. Or you could do it this way, and it might take you 3 days or 3 months or 3 years. Or you could do it this way, and it'll go so much faster, and it lowers the chance that you're going to crash target machines. So the course is really full of a whole bunch of those tips and tricks that I myself have learned over the years and have put into the course, but I've also had so many different folks give me ideas and topics that I've incorporated into the course itself. I got some great tips and tricks from a whole bunch of different friends throughout the years that I baked into the course so we can all benefit from them. All right, so let's take a step back now and do a formal definition of pen testing. And there's a method to my madness here. The reason I want to focus here on what is pen testing is there's a lot of confusion in the industry. Some people will call a vulnerability assessment a penetration test. And then when they ask for a pen test, they get surprised when somebody's trying to exploit them. Or some people will call a pen test a vulnerability assessment. And they ask for a vulnerability assessment, and then when you don't actually start exploiting them, they think you left something out. So we need to be clear and crisp in our terminology. So to that end, I offer you this formal definition of penetration testing. And this definition I'm about to give you, by the way, is compatible. In fact, it is identical to the definition of penetration testing included in the SANS critical controls. Have you heard of the SANS critical controls project? It's essentially a baseline of security actions that you can do to radically improve the security of your infrastructure. And it includes penetration testing. And the section of the critical controls on pen testing has an identical definition to the one that you see here. I know it does because I wrote that section of the critical controls. But anyway, also if you look at other things that involve information security and penetration testing, you'll see that this is compatible, a compatible definition with what you'll see there. For example, NIST Special Publication 800-53 talks about all the different kinds of things you can do to have an effective security program. And you'll see the definition of penetration testing that I'm using here is compatible with their definition of security testing. So, what is the definition we're going to use here? Penetration testing involves modeling the techniques used by real-world computer attackers. If you're not using the techniques of real-world attackers, you're not really providing an effective pen test. You want to do what the real-world bad guys do. You're trying to model effective threat actors here. Well, to what end? What are you trying to do? You're trying to find vulnerabilities. Now, if I stopped right there, we'd be doing a vulnerability assessment. And there's huge value in vulnerability assessment. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to dismiss vulnerability assessments. But pen testing goes further. It's not just about finding the vulnerabilities. It goes further so that under controlled circumstances, you actually exploit the flaws that you discover. The word penetration is there for a reason. You're trying to penetrate the target environment. And you're doing this in a manner that is professional. You want to do it as safely as you can, and you want to do it according to a good scope and really good rules of engagement. Now, SANS has put together scoping and rules of engagement documentation that you can download from the SANS Pentest website. If you do a Google search on SANS Pentest resources, you can find that we've got these documents available there for you. And in the 560 class, we walk you through creating an effective scope and rules of engagement. Now, why are you doing all this? You're trying to determine business risk and potential business impact. It's a huge thing. Your goal here is to help the organization improve security practices. Now, let me tell you about how my own thinking on the effectiveness of pen testing has evolved in the past 5 years. If you were to ask me 5 years ago, Ed, why do you do pen testing? One of the main things I would have said to you is so you can find flaws before the bad guys do and fix them. Now, that's still true, but I don't think it's the primary reason why you do pen testing. It is a reason, but not the primary reason. The primary reason you do pen testing is to help better understand your risk posture and then manage that risk posture. It's an important distinction. The two are not completely incompatible, but when you're doing a pen test, or even if you're not a pen tester and you're hiring somebody else to do pen testing for your organization, remember to focus and keep those pen testers focused on better understanding business risk. It's not just merely finding flaws and checking boxes. Instead, it's understanding risk so that you can use your precious, limited resources to best mitigate the risks that you discover. Think about pen testing that way, and you'll get more value out of it. All right, well, why do we do this exploitation thing? Right? I mean, I mentioned before, vulnerability assessment is a good thing to do. Why don't we just do that? You get a list of vulnerabilities, you mitigate against them, you're done. The fact is, exploitation, that crucial piece that differentiates a pen test from a vuln assessment, gives you more information. First of all, it helps you do false positive reduction, or maybe even elimination. It's hard for somebody to argue, we're not vulnerable, when I have shell on their target machine. It is worth noting, though, even if an exploit doesn't work, you should still report on the discovery of a potential vulnerability. See, sometimes you'll be finding a vulnerability, a choice one, and you'll try to exploit it, and it just won't work. It might not work because they have some mitigating control in place. Maybe there's a host-based IPS or network-based IPS, intrusion prevention system, that blocks it. Or maybe it's just the luck of the draw. You see, exploits typically work on a probabilistic basis. No exploit works 100% of the time, even against a vulnerable system. Some exploits work 95% of the time. Some work 50% of the time. Some work 5% of the time. So even if an exploit doesn't work, I advise you to still include in your report the fact that you discovered evidence of a vulnerability. You should say in your report you were unable to exploit it, but the organization should still look at that vulnerability and consider risk mitigation. Now, the other reason we do exploitation is it's a proof that vulnerability is there, and therefore a more realistic treatment of risk. Think about it this way. What if you were to tell the target organization that you found a massive vulnerability on a given machine on their DMZ, and you didn't exploit it because it's just a vulnerability assessment? So you found a vulnerability but no exploitation. You're not doing that. And you report that in. And the business decision makers look at that and they say, okay, what was on that machine? What sensitive was there? And the answer is nothing. There's no sensitive information on that box. And they'll say, okay, well, you know, maybe in a month or 6 months we'll fix that one. Versus a penetration test. In the penetration test, you found the same vulnerability that the vuln assessment found. But now you have a chance to exploit it. And you exploit that machine, you get on it, and you find it has no sensitive data. But you have shell on the box. Once you're on that machine on the DMZ, you can then start looking around to see what other machines are nearby and maybe start attacking those. In fact, I'm going to give you an example from a lab in 560 where we pivot mercilessly through the target environment. So we can hack into one machine, and from there we're going to hack into another machine, just spreading our way through the target organization. So you exploited that one box on the DMZ, found nothing on it. But you did find that it had a TCP connection to port 445 on another box. TCP 445, that's used for server message block. So you decide to pivot from the one machine that you conquered on the DMZ to another machine on TCP port 445. When you get to that other box, maybe you find 10 million credit cards, and you report that. Now, What do you think the target organization is going to say when they discover that this critical vulnerability on this one machine, which had no sensitive data, allows you to pivot through the organization and find another machine where you're able to get access to 10 million credit cards? You think they're going to say, oh, we'll fix that in a month or 6 months? No. You have now provided them more value. You've given them a better understanding of their risk, and they're going to mitigate it more effectively and more quickly. That's the big point here, using one machine as a pivot to get deeper inside the network. The way it might work is you, the pen tester, might exploit a machine on the DMZ, and from there you could attack other machines on the DMZ, or pivot to get to an internal machine. Or increasingly, you know what I like to do? I like to exploit a client-side machine, an internal box, and we have some labs in the SANS Security 560 course where we exploit internal machines, and then from there pivot to other internal machines, or even to a DMZ system. One thing that I find quite effective is exploiting that client machine using IPv4. Right? Maybe I trick them into surfing to my website, I deliver back an exploit, and I'm on that machine, and maybe I've exploited them via IPv4. From that machine, I might start exploring the internal network, looking around with IPv6. And we give you some tips for doing that in the 560 class. But for right now, just remember, you might exploit a machine over IPv4, and then once you get on that machine, start looking around for IPv6 stuff, because it's often allowed on intranets, especially on just local area networks. A lot of people leave IPv6 enabled on their boxes, but aren't as carefully filtering it or looking for attacks against it. And plus, exploitation leads to post-exploitation, which really helps you understand the business risks of the target organization. So that's why we do exploitation. That's the unique perspective that pen testing gives us. Now, there are risks of exploitation. For example, when you exploit a target machine, you could crash a service. So that service is just down. That's bad news. It could get even worse than that, though. You could crash the whole system. Maybe a blue screen of death or a kernel panic on a, say, a Linux box or something like that. That would be bad. But if I'm doing a pen test and something's going to come down, I'd rather have it come down right now so that I could contact an emergency phone number in the target organization saying, look, a machine just came down. Can you help fix it? Versus impacting the system's stability or integrity. What I don't want to do is hit a system during a pen test, have it continue moving forward, kind of limping along in a hurt fashion, and then it crashes a day or a week or a month later. That's really bad news. I don't want that. Now, we're going to talk about some techniques for trying to minimize the chance of that happening, and I'm going to cover something I call the pen tester's pledge for you in just a couple minutes. Now, there also could be data exposure with legal ramifications. As a pen tester, you don't want to get and download 10 million credit cards. When I talked earlier on the previous slide about getting access to 10 million credit cards, that's what I meant. You get access to those credit cards, but you don't want to download them because then your system, well, could become subject of attack, and you're now responsible for protecting all that credit card information. As a pen tester, you want to get in and measure what you have access to without actually downloading all that stuff. You don't want 1 million healthcare records. You don't want 10 million credit cards. You don't want all this sensitive PII or PHI. You're measuring access, and you do that by sampling small amounts of it. We talk about some examples in the 560 class about how to sample things, like by sending in database queries that just count the number of rows in given tables, or counting the number of lines in a file, and more. Also, you could inadvertently access the wrong system. This is scary and dangerous stuff. IPv4 addresses aren't that big. It's easy to transpose two numbers, right? So, for example, an IP address of 10.11.12.13 is very different than 10.11.21.13. Right? It's just, you've just transposed those two numbers, and that's a totally different system, maybe one that's not in your scope. Could be out of scope of the target organization, or maybe even a completely different organization. I'm not trying to scare you away from doing exploitation. It is a fine and wonderful thing to do in pen testing. I am trying to say, though, do it carefully, do it intelligently. Verify that exploitation is allowed in your rules of engagement that you define up front in the pen test, and then double check while you're working on the pen test that you tell them that hey, you're about to enter the exploitation phase. One of the things we really love to do in a pen test is have a daily debriefing with target system personnel to say to them, hey, here's what we accomplished today, and here's what our plan is for tomorrow. And do that every day during the pen test. You don't want it to be a big burden. You don't want to spend, an hour or two on your daily debriefings. It's about 10 or 15 minutes. Just adding some transparency so that they can see what you're up to. And for one of your daily debriefings, you might say, okay, we finished our scanning phase, and we're now moving into exploitation. Here's what we plan to exploit. It's good to give them that heads up. And always remember the probabilistic nature of exploit success. I mentioned it earlier here, that some exploits work 90-some% of the time. Others don't. And you need to understand that as you're doing it. Sometimes when we're doing the SANS560 class, somebody will run an exploit and it doesn't work. And they run it again and it doesn't work. And they run it a third time and it works. And they say to me, why did it work the third time? And I said, because the third time things all came together. In fact, with things like address space layout randomization, ASLR, the operating system vendors are trying to make it even more stochastic, even more pseudo-random, so that exploitation success is lower. But if we carefully choose our exploits, we may be more likely to get successful execution. Now, I'd like to review a couple of tools for you here, and then I'm going to put them together in a scenario that we do in a lab for SANS560. I'll walk you through all the different piece parts so you can see how you can use that in your own environment. Now, one of the major tools we use in the 560 course is, of course, Metasploit, a fantastic tool for doing penetration testing. It does all kinds of things, but it includes an exploit arsenal. Now, Metasploit is available on a free basis. There's also a commercial implementation of Metasploit called Metasploit Pro. You use a Metasploit user interface, like MSF console, which gives you a Metasploit command prompt, to choose a given exploit, which might attack a target machine, exploiting a buffer overflow condition, or exploiting some other problem in the target environment. So the exploit gives you code execution. It could be a client-side exploit where you're going after a browser or Adobe Reader or the Java environment, or it could be a service-side exploit where you're going after a listening service on the network. You take your user interface and you choose an exploit. You then choose a payload. The payload is the code you want to run over there. And one of the best payloads in Metasploit is the Meterpreter. It's a very full-featured command shell created for computer attackers. You choose your exploit, you choose your payload, you apply them together, and you launch them at the target. Now, Metasploit also includes things like auxiliary modules, which will scan for, well, given services in a target environment, or do things like port scanning, or do things like fuzzing, where they vary user input, looking to see if they can cause some sort of crash condition or other unusual circumstance in the target environment. And then there's post modules, which you run after you've successfully exploited a target environment. That's post modules. Some of them will let you dump credentials. Some will let you plunder the target environment. Really, really useful stuff. So this is sort of the arsenal of different Metasploit piece parts. But one of the most useful exploits in all of Metasploit is the PSExec module. Now, PSExec was originally introduced by Mark Rusinovich over at Microsoft sysinternals. He did it a long time ago. It was well over a decade ago. But the folks at Metasploit have incorporated it into Metasploit itself. Now, it's completely separate code. It's not using the sysinternals code at all. Instead, they use a very similar concept, but they've written their own Metasploit code to do this, and it's fantastic. If you have SMB access of a target machine, that is, you're able to get into that target Windows box via server message block, and you have admin credentials, such as an admin username and admin password, the PSExec module lets you get code execution on the target box. Now, it's in an exploit module. It's under exploit Windows SMB PSExec for Metasploit. But it feels weird calling it an exploit because it's just using built-in Windows capabilities, orchestrating those capabilities through a piece of code that comes with Metasploit. That's the PSExec module. And the way it works is it establishes an SMB session to the target box. You choose a given RHOST. That's the thing you're trying to exploit. You define in Metasploit an SMB username, an SMB pass. That's the password. And then you exploit the target box. And it runs a payload over there, such as the Meterpreter. The way it works is it'll make an SMB connection. And then across that SMB connection, it writes an executable into the target's file system. It then creates a service to run that executable. It runs that service, which launches the executable, which is usually a Metasploit payload like the Meterpreter, and then it automatically removes the executable and the service. It cleans up after itself. I should point out, this is unlike the PSExec module from sysinternals. The PSExec tool from sysinternals leaves the PSExec service behind. The Metasploit module now cleans that up, which is pretty cool. Also, it supports pass the hash. So with Metasploit PSExec, you can authenticate with a username and password in the administrators group, or a username and hash. And this is one of the most useful exploits in all of Metasploit. That's why I put it in all caps here, especially if you're in a fully patched Windows internal network environment. And this leads to this concept. I call it the pen tester's pledge. The idea here is there's a bunch of vulnerable code that runs on various machines. But if you were to launch, say, a buffer overflow exploit or a format string attack or some other kind of attack to get into a target piece of software, there's a chance you could crash the software or maybe even cause a room full of blue screens of death. That would be awful. My point here with this slide and the pen tester's pledge is once you get access to a Windows environment, like, say, a given machine, dump the hashes from that environment, and then from there, spread to other machines using psexec. Because when psexec exploits a target machine, it creates its own process. It actually will run its code out of a process called rundll32.exe. And if that process crashes, you don't care, because it was created by psexec execution itself, as opposed to exploiting, say, some vulnerability in IIS or VNC or some other listening service or even some client. Once you get the hashes spread through the target environment, lowering the risk of crashing target software, and you can do that with psexec. So that got me thinking about this sort of one of these despair posters. I'm sure you've seen the despair posters. And I put one together with a room full of blue screens of death, and I call it the pen tester's pledge. And the pen tester's pledge works this way. I'll go ahead and take it for you here. I, Ed Skoudis, I state your name, Ed Skoudis, do hereby pledge to use psexec to exploit Windows target machines after I've gained admin credentials and SMB access to the target environment. So maybe you've gotten into a machine on the DMZ or on the intranet, and you've grabbed those credentials, and now you have SMB access to other machines. I shall forsake other server-side exploits thereafter. Otherwise, I unnecessarily risk crashing target systems. If you do a Google search for pen tester's pledge, you can download this if you want to have a copy of it. I was so excited because when I originally put this together, I tweeted it, and Mark Rusinovich himself retweeted it. So it was kind of neat. I had a little bit of a fanboy thing going there for a bit. All right. Additional capabilities and tools. Metasploit also includes the route command at the MSF console prompt. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some things together in an example scenario. I'm going to walk you through a big scenario where we're going to use a bunch of the ideas we've been talking about here. So first idea we've been talking about is psexec and how wonderful it is. Second idea, Metasploit has the route command. In the route command, at the MSF console prompt, I can implement a nice, convenient pivot. Check this out. By pivot, I mean I can attack one machine and use that one machine's location in the network and its resources to attack another box. So what I'm going to do here is at my Metasploit framework console prompt, I'm going to use some exploit 1 and set some rhost, this is my target machine, to victim 1. I'm going to set some payload, this is the thing I want to run on the target, to say a meterpreter, so I get that wonderful meterpreter shell. And then I exploit it, so now I've gone from my pen tester's box and I've gotten meterpreter shell on victim 1. It gives me a little meterpreter prompt. I can then background that prompt by either typing the background command or by hitting Control-Z, and then it'll say, do you want to background this? I type Y, and it will background it. And it shows me my meterpreter session ID. The meterpreter session ID is just an integer that starts at 1 and goes up by 1 for each new session that you get. Then at my MSF prompt, now listen carefully to this. At my MSF prompt, I can say route add, and then I can give it victim2 subnet, and then some subnet mask, and then the session ID number for my meterpreter session with victim 1. And what that tells Metasploit to do is any new traffic I have that is destined for victim 2 subnet, I want that carried across the meterpreter so it will go from victim 1 into victim 2. As far as victim 2 is concerned, victim 1 has just hacked him. Now, the important point here, so what I could do is I could do use exploit 2, maybe it's psexec, set your rhost to victim 2, set your payload to whatever payload you want, and then exploit it, and now Metasploit says, I've got traffic destined for victim 2. I carry it across my meterpreter session from victim 1, so it goes from victim 1 into victim 2. And this lets you pivot, and you can make these things nested. You can go from machine to machine to machine throughout the environment this way. It's very powerful, but here is an important thing to remember. Don't confuse the Metasploit framework console route command with the meterpreter route command. This is something when we teach the 560 class, I beg the students not to make a mistake with. And what I'm begging them to say is, don't type route at the meterpreter prompt when you want to implement a pivot. Because see, route at the meterpreter prompt will let you manage the routing tables of victim 1, which is good unless you accidentally type in a bum route, a bad route into victim 1. You're going to destroy victim 1's routing tables, such that victim 1 might not be able to communicate with victim 2, And victim 1 might not even be able to communicate back with you. So my point here is be very careful with the route command. Type it at the interpreter prompt, and you're going to change the routing tables of victim 1. Most likely, if you want to implement a pivot, you're going to want to type the route command at the MSF console prompt. MSF prompt by itself, that implements a pivot when you use the route command. At the interpreter prompt, you're changing the routing tables. All right, another topic that I wanted to just briefly describe to you is pivoting, not using Metasploit framework console route command. That's cool, but another form of pivot. It's a netcat relay. We use them in 560 as well. We use MSF route. We also use this technique, this netcat relay. What here I have is an attacker machine, which might be a Windows box, could even be a Linux machine, with some sort of SMB-speaking client software. Here I have a target Windows box, but let's say my attacker machine can't get direct access to the target box because it's firewalled. But there might be another machine, let's say it's a Linux box, maybe it's on a DMZ, or even on an internal network, that I can gain access to. And what I could do is I could run SMB client software on my own machine and set up a pivoting relay through this Linux box, let me go back a slide, to get access to that SMB service on the other side. And you could do this with a traditional netcat relay, but I added for the 560 class a little twist into this relay. Watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use the make nod command, which is a Linux standard command, to create a special entity in the file system. I'm going to call that entity backpipe, and I'm going to make it of type P. That means I want a named pipe. Named pipes are special things in Linux file systems. It means I can dump data into them, and the data that comes out is going to be in FIFO order. The first data that I dump into the named pipe is going to be the first data that comes out, FIFO. And then I can implement a netcat relay to pivot SMB, which normally uses TCP port 445, this way. I'll say netcat listen. This is going to be on this Linux relay machine. Most Linuxes include netcat by default. So netcat listen on local port 445. And I'm going to skip over the 0 less than backpipe for just a second. Whatever data comes into this netcat listener, TCP connection comes in, I'm going to pipe it into a netcat client to shoot it to my target Windows machine. I'll say it's IP address 10.10.10.10 on port 445. So that forwards the data in. Whatever data comes back from the target, I pipe into T. The Linux T command is a very special command. What it'll do is it displays on standard output any data that comes on standard input. So this will display the SMB on the screen of where I'm running this listener to client relay. T, in addition to putting the stuff on the screen, will also write it into the file system. So it writes it into this named pipe called backpipe. 0 less than means this netcat listener gets its standard input from the backpipe, so the netcat client, whatever it receives back, will dump into the backpipe, forwarding it through to the listener, so it makes a two-way relay. So all the data goes forward, and all the responses come back. It's a traditional netcat relay, and it's a darn useful thing. Then on my attacker machine, I can do net use, say it's a Windows box, I'm just going to make an SMB connection, with //, and I give it my Linux machine's IP address. $. So I'm actually mounting a share, and as far as my SMB client net use command says, I'm actually going to my Linux machine. But my Linux machine is just forwarding that to the target Windows box. So it implements a beautiful pivot. And I could mount a share there with net use, or I could use psexec, whether it be sysinternals psexec or Metasploit psexec, or I could grab hashes, all kinds of things. Very useful idea. One additional idea I want to introduce you before we get into the scenario is this. It's a tool called Mimikatz. You may have heard of it. It actually came out a couple of years ago, and it's tremendously powerful. It was created by Benjamin Delpy, who also goes by the NIM Gentle Kiwi. Its focus is on pulling credentials from memory. It will search through the memory of Windows processes looking for landman hashes, NT hashes, and clear text passwords. It can pull them, and I'm telling you, I work a lot on large-scale breach cases, and over the last 18 months, there have been several big breach cases, ones that are written up in the newspaper, where the bad guys have used Mimikatz. And remember how I define pen testing. Our job as pen testers is to use the tools, the techniques, the capabilities that real-world bad guys use. We want to mimic their activities. Bad guys are using Mimikatz. If we're going to mimic them, well, we can use Mimikatz too. Now, originally it was created as a separate executable, mimikatz.exe, that you would have to push onto a Windows box. But now it's a Metasploit interpreter module. So once you get the interpreter loaded onto a target machine and running, maybe you got the interpreter running there by using psexec, You can then type load Mimikatz. It extends the features of Meterpreter, so now it's got Mimikatz commands. And one of these commands is wdigest, which searches a specific area of LSAS's memory to try to pull clear text passwords. Really powerful. So what I'd like to do now is I've given you those different ideas. We've talked about PSExec. We've talked about the Meterpreter. We've talked about MSF console. We've talked about the route command at MSF console to pivot things. We've talked about Netcat as a pivoting capability using Netcat relays. And we've talked about Mimikatz. So let's pull them all together here and now. This is a lab that we do in SANS Security 560. We do it all hands-on there, but I want to walk you through step by step so you can see the scenario that a real pen tester would use to pivot mercilessly in a target organization. All right, so here's the scenario. And I really try in the class to illustrate these things graphically because I think in pictures myself. I'm a product of the Macintosh, Sesame Street, visually oriented generation. Maybe many of you are as well. And I like to think about these things visually. I also like to work at the command line. So I'm a visual guy who likes to work at the command line. And I think you'll see that in the 560 course because the way I do the command line stuff and a lot of figures that illustrate what's happening here. So the scenario here is you have a Linux box and you're running Metasploit. You've got a compromised machine on the DMZ. I'm not going to cover how we compromise that because I wanted to keep us focused on the pivoting stuff. But you have shell on a DMZ target machine at 10.10.75.1. It's a Linux box. What you're going to do is you're going to create one of those Netcat relays. So you're going to listen on inbound TCP port 4545. Whatever data comes in, you're going to forward to target 1 on port 445. You're then going to use Metasploit's PSExec to get the Meterpreter running on this target Windows box by going through your Linux machine and then get the Meterpreter prompt coming back. And then you'll do a hash dump on that. Once we've done that, we're then going to pivot using MSF route to attack 10.10.10.20, but we'll do that a little bit later. So the first start here of this lab is to set up a Netcat relay on our compromised Linux DMZ machine, then to PSExec through it so we can get Meterpreter and hashes from the box. All right, so we start by launching our Metasploit framework console. Here I'm just running MSF console, and it pulls up Metasploit, choosing from different ASCII artwork. I like the one that shows the Metasploit cow. And here I'm going to do use exploit Windows SMB PSExec. So this is the PSExec module for Metasploit. Then I'm going to do service IP table stop. Service IP table stop. I want to turn off the firewall on my own Linux box. Otherwise, any reverse connections I have coming in, like my Meterpreter session that I want to be a reverse connection, it'll be blocked. So I'm turning off my firewall, and I'm also assuming that I have a username and password for the target box. Remember, PSExec requires SMB access, and it requires an admin username and password. Let me go back a couple slides. So I've gotten those by maybe plundering the target environment or by doing password guessing. So I'm going to take that SMB session that I've set up using PSExec, going through my compromised Linux box to get the Meterpreter to run on the target box and make a connection back to me to TCP port 80. The reason I'm doing TCP port 80 is many networks allow that outbound, right? So it's going to connect back to my own machine on TCP port 80, and then I'm going to do a hash dump. All right? The reason I turned off my firewall is otherwise that TCP port 80 wouldn't be allowed back in. Cool. All right, so I got my firewall off. I've set my SMB user. I've set my SMB password. Now, I show you the figure here again so you can kind of see illustrative-wise what we're doing here. I've got to set some Metasploit variables. I'm going to set my R host to my Linux target, set my R host to 10.10.75.1, because this Linux machine is going to be attacking 10.10.10.75.1 on an R port of 4545. This is actually a wonderful capability of Metasploit's PSExec. Normally, SMB just uses TCP port 445. But in Metasploit, we've got more flexibility. It defaults the PSExec module to talking SMB over port 445. But what if I can't use port 445 on this Linux machine? It might be firewalled off. It might have some other service on it, like a Samba daemon. But as long as I can find any other port that I can listen on, I can set my R port for Metasploit to attack that port. So here I've just chosen 4545 as an example, but it could be something else. It could be any port that happens to be allowed into this Linux box where I could forward things through. I then set my payload to Windows Meterpreter reverse TCP. I then set my L port to 80 so that when it communicates back, it'll be communicating with port 80. And then I show my options just to review it. So what I've set up is psexec on Metasploit, so it'll exploit this Linux target, at least that's what it thinks it's going to exploit, where I've got a listener on port 4545. When that connection comes in, it will deliver to the target machine the Meterpreter payload, which it will then execute psexec style to make a reverse TCP connection back to my own box. Sweet. I then have to go to that Linux machine. Remember I have shell on that Linux machine, the one that I'm pivoting through, and I'm going to create my relay, and I'm going to call it I'm going to call the file, the named pipe, I'm going to call it MSF backpipe because I'm Metasploiting through it. So I'm going to cd into /temp. By the way, when I'm hacking a Linux machine, I like to put stuff into /temp because it's just temporary and I can delete it afterwards and nobody else should be relying on it. It might get me noticed, I admit, but usually the stuff I'm putting in there isn't going to be there for long term. I then do a make nod, MSF backpipe, P, because I'm making a FIFO. I have my netcat verbosely listening on local port 4545, pulling its standard input from the named pipe called MSF backpipe. Any data that comes in, I'm piping to a netcat client to connect to 10.10.10.10 on port 445, because I have to go to 445. That's where Windows listens for SMB. Any data that comes back, I'm going to T, so it'll display it on the screen, and dump it into the MSF backpipe. Once I've got that Linux target set up, I then type exploit, so that Metasploit says I'm going to psexec to remote target 10.10.75.1, remote port 4545, giving it an SMB user and SMB password, which gets forwarded through my netcat relay, giving me code execution on 10.10.10.10. It's going to create a service, use the service to run the Meterpreter. The Meterpreter is going to make a connection back to my machine on TCP port 80. It will then delete the executable and delete the service on 10.10.10.10. And now I have my Meterpreter session. When I type exploit, you'll see it says uploading payload. It's got the executable with the pseudo-random name. And it creates a service to run that. And then it shows me I have a connection coming back to my machine from 10.10.10.10. Cool. I can then do things like hash dump, which will dump the hashes from the target box, or run hash dump. These are two totally different ways to get hashes from target Windows machines. What hash dump does is it pulls them from a certain area of LSAS memory. And you can see here I got the different hashes for the box. If I do run hash dump tries to pull them from the registry. It's not pulling them from memory. And you say, which of these two techniques is better? Well, run hash dump has less of a chance of crashing the target machine. So run hash dump is safer because it's just going into the registry in the file system. Well, why wouldn't I always do run hash dump? Well, sometimes there's a host-based IPS that may block it. That's why it's nice to have the option of getting it from memory, although there's more of a chance I would crash it with a hash dump command. So I could do hash dump or run hash dump. Either way is good. Run hash dump is a little safer. Notice also it says that it's dumping password hints. You know how Windows machines allow you to have password hints? You know, so you could type in there, hey, it's your mother's maiden name, or remember to put the capital T in the password. When you do run hash dump, it'll pull the password hints from the target machine as well. I think that's pretty cool. All right, next. All right, so what we've got so far is we've used some of the techniques we've described. We've used a netcat relay to pivot through this Linux box. We've got an existing Meterpreter session coming back on TCP port 80. In this lab, in the 560 class, we continue going further. What we do is we use MSF route. Remember I covered that earlier? We use MSF route to pivot any traffic destined for 10.10.10.20. This is another Windows box on the DMZ. See, you can't get to port 445 from your Linux box to this 10.10.10.20 machine. But this machine on the DMZ can. See, a lot of times they'll allow things like TCP port 445 to different machines within the DMZ, but you can't get to 445 directly. You have to pivot through. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this existing Meterpreter session to find an MSF route to route through it, and then utilize the native characteristics of 10.10.10.10 so that it can communicate via TCP port 445 using SMB on this other machine 10.10.10.20. That's going to give us a new Meterpreter session back that we'll load Mimikatz onto and then dump hashes and passwords that way. All right, so I show you again the picture here. This Linux target we're not using anymore because we use that just to get into 10.10.10.10. Once we're into 10.10.10.10, we've got this beautiful Meterpreter session that we're going to keep, right? We're going to do MSF route to pivot through that session. So I'm going to background my Meterpreter session, and notice it says here, backgrounding session 1. Then I double check, am I at my MSF prompt? Yes, I am, so I can use the route command here. See, if I use the route command at my Meterpreter prompt, I'm altering the routing tables of 10.10.10.10. I don't want to do that. I want to pivot. So at my MSF prompt, I do route add 10, 10, 10, 20, and then I give it a net mask, and I like to do this where I get very precise. I do 255.255.255.255. That means any traffic that Metasploit generates for this specific IP address, it's got to match 100%, I want that to be carried through Meterpreter session 1. And then I hit enter. I've now implemented my pivot. So that I can then set my R host to 10, 10, 10, 20. Then I set my R port to 445. Now I have to set it to 445 because that's where 10, 10, 10, 20 is listening for SMB. Before I didn't have to set it to 445 because I was going through my netcat relay, which was listening on 4545. But now I have to set it to 445 so that I can get to 10, 10, 10, 20. I set my L port to 443. The L port is where your Meterpreter session is going to communicate back with. And I like to do this. I'll use like port 80 for one of them and then port 443 for another one. You could use 80 for all of them if you'd like, or 443 for all of them. But I like to kind of separate them out. And in most environments, port 80 or 443 is allowed outbound, which is kind of cool. All right, so I set my R host to 10, 10, 10, 20. I set my R port to 445 because that's what 10, 10, 10, 10 can communicate with 20 using. I set my L port to 443. I show my options to make sure they're all good. And then I type exploit, which is just the most wonderful command of any command line language ever, right? Now, when I do that, it says here that it's uploading a payload, which has that pseudo-random name because I'm essentially PS execing. And it says Meterpreter 2 session opened. Now, sometimes it's got a little bit of a bug, and it'll say exploit failed. The SMB server did not reply to our request. But as long as you get the Meterpreter prompt, it worked. As long as you get the Meterpreter prompt, yeah, you're in there on 10, 10, 10, 20. So I can show you that here by typing sysinfo, and it gives me information like the operating system host name, the build type, and so forth. And I can do ipconfig, and you'll see I am executing on 10, 10, 10, 20 here. So I use my existing Meterpreter session to pivot through to get to 10, 10, 10, 20. Now I have a Meterpreter session coming back from 10, 10, 10, 20 itself. That's a beautiful thing. To what end? Well, watch this. I'm going to load Mimikatz into my Meterpreter session on 10, 10, 10, 20. So now I can run a command like MSV, and watch what MSV does. MSV pulls information from specific areas of memory on that Windows box to give me landman hashes and NT hashes. Now you might say, but Ed, landman hashes are a thing of the past. They're gone now, right? I mean, it was Windows Vista that eliminated landman hashes by default from the Windows registry. Yeah, from the registry. But I'm pulling these from memory. And you'll see that on a lot of Windows machines, even though you don't have landman hashes in the registry, there's still stuff that has landman hashes in memory. So I always want to use a chance to get landman hashes because they're much weaker and much easier to crack. In the 560 class, we talked about a bunch of different ways to dump these hashes and to crack them. All right, so here I got some landman hashes and some NT hashes. But if I run the wdigest command, it actually shows me the clear text password of the currently logged in user on the machine. And the clear text password will be displayed right on the screen on the output. It's pretty awesome. All right. When I finish, I'm going to go ahead and exit this because I've plundered the target environment. I've done hash dumping from 10, 10, 10, 10. I've gotten credentials, including a clear text password from 10, 10, 10, 20. So I'm going to do exit. That exits Meterpreter session 2. If I do a sessions-L to list the sessions, you'll see I still have Meterpreter session 1 open. I'm going to go ahead and kill that with sessions-K. And then give it a session number that kills the session, and then I can exit. So I've shown you here how we can apply those different ideas that we started the webcast with to mercilessly pivot throughout the target environment. So in conclusion, pen testing can help an organization better understand its business risk. And when you do pen testing, I strongly advise you to consider pivoting through the target environment, always staying within your scope. In fact, one of the themes of 560 is pivot mercilessly. Always staying within scope and always following rules of engagement. And if you think about what we just covered here in our example, pen testers can take advantage of Metasploit and the awesome Meterpreter payload. You could use PS exec for code execution via SMB. That's amazing and wonderful. And that's just part of the feature set of Windows itself, right? You can use netcat relays as well as MSF console route to implement pivots. We just showed you how. And then I can do hash dump in a couple different ways. I could do the hash dump command, or I could type run hash dump and get hashes from the target box. And run hash dump is safer and will even show me password hints. And I can use Mimikatz, this fantastic tool, to get credentials. And Mimikatz has been fully integrated into the Meterpreter. This is awesome. Know your tools in depth. In fact, another theme of the 560 class is this. It's the ninja theme. In fact, this is the coin from SANS Security 560. I don't show you the cipher. The cipher's on the back, right? But here's the coin that you win if you win the Capture the Flag, if you're on the top team, or if you come to Coinapalooza, the thing we're going to do at SANS Pentest Austin. You win this coin, and on the back of the coin, above the cipher, it says this. It's not the weapon that's important. It's the ninja wielding it. Our goal in the SANS 560 class is to help you improve your ninja skills so that you can do effective penetration testing. That's why we have this little inspirational thing on the back of this coin. And again, we should give props to our host and sponsor for this webcast, SANS Pentest Austin. It's coming up May 18th. That's a little more than a month away. It's like 5 or 6 weeks. There's available discount if you sign up in the next week or two. You can see that on the SANS website. Go to sans.org/pentest2015. It's got 6 classes, including the 401 class, Security Essentials. It's got the 504 class on incident response and hacker attacks. It's got the 560 class, the one we've been talking about here, and a whole bunch more. We got 3 nights of Net Wars. We got 1 night of Cyber City, so you get to hack into our Cyber City environment and stop terrorist attacks against it. We've got Coinapalooza, so you can earn up to 5 different SANS Pentest coins. And then, of course, there's the barbecue, which I'm getting kind of hungry for right now. So that'll be in Austin, Texas, May 18th through 23rd. Let's go ahead and open it up to some questions. You guys have asked some wonderful questions so far. Let me go ahead and say, here we go. Adam says, will AV modules detect the executable dropped by PSExec? All right, so here's the deal. If you're using the Microsoft PSExec module, that's the one that you can freely download from Microsoft sysinternals, antivirus tools tend not to notice that because it's used as a legitimate system administration tool. If you're using the Metasploit version of PSExec, the executable created by the PSExec module, when you go ahead and launch it, that payload might trigger an antivirus tool. What you'll need to do is you'll need to encode it in various ways so that it won't. And there's a fantastic tool, Adam, called the Veil Framework. It's actually a whole set of tools. And the Veil Framework allows you to alter the executable that you'll then launch via Metasploit's PSExec, and therefore the antivirus tool will effectively be evaded. The Veil Framework includes a whole bunch of different techniques and ideas that will alter an executable for antivirus evasion. All right, cool. Next question is from Dwight. Where can the presentation be downloaded? The download on the SANS site airs out. Yes, because we make the slides available for download within 24 hours of delivering the webcast. So the URL that you receive that says you can download the slides here, that will be active within 24 hours. I understand from Trevor it's actually going to be a little less than 24 hours, but 24 hours is the promise that you'll be able to download these slides. Thank you for your interest in that, Dwight. I appreciate it. Let's see. Okay, Eric asked a fantastic question. Sounds perfect for an external pen test, but what are your thoughts on performing internal pen testing? I recommend you do it. Internal pen testing, you can use the exact techniques we just described. They'll work fine for internal pen tests, especially things like PSExec. Once I get access to an internal environment, whether it's because I'm modeling a threat actor that has access to the internal environment or I fight my way in, I'm PSExecing throughout the internal infrastructure. I do think you should do internal pen tests periodically because you're modeling a different kind of threat. You're modeling maybe a bad insider, or you're modeling somebody who is determined enough to get through your external defenses. If you do only external pen testing, I think you're missing out on a big piece of the picture. So I strongly encourage you to do internal pen testing. You can use the techniques and the tools we just described, and I think they'll serve you very well. Let's see here. Yes, Yusuf says, can we get a copy of the slides? Those slides will be available at the URL that was provided to you when you registered for this webcast. And you know, another thing to think about, for those of you who do pen testing, people will ask me, they say, how can I start doing pen testing? I love this idea of pen testing. How can I do it? And the answer is this. I actually wrote a blog posting about a year and a half ago. And it's called So You Want to Be a Pen Tester. And it talks about 3 different ways to get into pen testing. Method number 1 involves you working for a company, starting to help out with their pen testing. Maybe you're on the security team, maybe you're not. I recommend you just volunteer saying, look, there should be pen testing done here. Who does it? And if they say it's this team, say, I want to help that team. I just want to go help them. I'll do it off hours. I'll do it. Just let me analyze it. Maybe some of the stuff they're working on. I'm not going to slow them down, but I just want to start building some skills and helping them out. So you could do that inside your own company. Method 2, what you could do is you could go and join a company that does pen test professionally. That's a reasonable way to do it, but they might have some sort of barrier to entry. Method 3, you could start doing your own pen tests on the side, but be careful with that. Make sure you have appropriate insurance. I, in fact, talk a little bit about that at the SANS560 course, and So You Wanna Be a Pen Tester is the name of that blog posting for that. So you can check that kind of thing out. Let's see, we got a question here from Michael. Do you need root administrator level access to pivot via the Meterpreter auto route? You do not. Can you pivot through a standard Windows user? Yes, you can. So you do not have to have high privileges to implement these pivots, which is actually quite beautiful. Now, if you are pivoting through a Linux machine using the Netcat relay I just showed you, if you're going to listen on a port less than 1024, you're going to need root privileges. But if you're going through a Windows box, as long as that port isn't in use, you can use it regardless of its port number. So you can auto-route through your pivots. You could do pivots. I did a webcast actually with John Strand about 6 weeks ago where I showed you how you could use netsh. Let me send this to all. You can use the netsh command to implement some really cool pivot features using built-in features of Windows machines. That particular that was called Pillage the Village Redux. And I'll go ahead. That was a webcast that John Strand and I did about 6 weeks ago, and I show you even another way to pivot on Windows boxes using the netsh port proxy capability. It's pretty powerful and really cool stuff. Let's see. Kay sends an interesting request. Is there an online resource for pen test insurance if I want to pen test as a consultant? I haven't found one, but I do send people to my insurance broker. I know this sounds kind of weird, but I have a wonderful insurance broker who knows the pen testing business, and I've used him for like 12 or 13 years now. And sometimes when my existing insurance policy needs to be renewed, he hunts around and finds me a decent price on other pen testing insurance. If you email me, my email address is ed@counterhack.com. If you email me, Kay, I can hook you up with Anthony. He's my insurance agent. I know it sounds kind of weird that I really like my insurance agent, but he does a really good job for me. So I think you'll like that. Let's see. Gerben asks a question. What's your view on Cobalt Strike, and do you know better red team collaboration tools may also be run on top of Metasploit? Okay, I love Cobalt Strike. I think it's great stuff. I should point out that Raphael Mudge is a good friend of mine. But that said, I review tools independently of who's my friend and who's not my friend. Cobalt Strike is a commercial tool that runs on top of Metasploit and implements collaboration, so you can have multiple pen testers collaborating using a collaboration server, and you can hand off Meterpreter sessions and other things to each other dynamically. He's also released a free tool called Armitage. And before you go out and buy Cobalt Strike, you should definitely check out Armitage. Armitage, let me send that to all. Because it's written in a fashion consistent with Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike includes a lot of additional capabilities and features, but Armitage will give you an idea of what it's all about. And I recommend you check out Armitage. And then if you really like that stuff and want some additional features and commercial support, you can go and get Cobalt Strike. Raphael Mudge has also done a comparison of what's in Armitage, the free tool that he makes available, versus what's in Armitage. And you can find that if you do a Google search of Armitage versus Cobalt Strike. I think you'll find it really quite good. And I see that's bringing us now to the top of the hour. Yep, it's a couple minutes afterwards. I really do appreciate your guys' time and attention. Thank you. It was such a great thing to be able to talk with you on this webcast. I hope I've given you some ideas that you can use in your next webcast and some references to some resources. If you do need an insurance agent that can help you get some good pen test insurance, email me and I will get back to you with Anthony's contact information. And also please do check out sans.org/pentest2015. We got some really cool stuff coming up for you. All right, thanks guys. You have a wonderful afternoon and hope to hear from you soon. Take care. Trevor, you want to close things out?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, no problem. I would love to say thank you so much to our featured speaker, Ed, for his great presentation and for bringing this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in today. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived webcasts, visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.